to the ordinance, since we're not going to vote and spend money, we can have a discussion.
I thought that was likely right. I wouldn't argue with you.
Well, I was, everybody around either.
I'm mellowing in my old age.
All right, so we'll go ahead and close the board. We'll be present tonight. So we'll have announcements.
Mr. Reddick, we can't hear you.
We'll have to use the mics.
I have not used the mic, you can hope you can hear me through.
Can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
No.
That mask may have something to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Better.
I don't bring on anybody else else. All right, we have Cheryl ready from the Trees and Parks, and she's going to share some things that have gone on with that committee.
Okay, at our last meeting, we had a call meeting, so our information is fresher. We accepted a bid to get some trees at George Street Park mulched. We could even consider looking at a contract for regular kinds of maintenance with an outsourced group, but we're still in the discussion stage of that. And we also talked about invasives, but I'm going to let Laura fill us in on that.
They voted unanimously to go with fall planting in the space that was cleared of Asbury Park with Reforest Atlanta. So Reforest Atlanta actually submitted a bid for plant installation and the plants to me last week, or an estimate on the plants, and it was tremendously under what I anticipated it would be. So for plant installation, which includes their crew performing all the prep work and fully installing everything and mulching the plants, $1,200. And I didn't bring it with the number of plants, but it was a large number. It was over 500 plants. And the cost of the plants was approximately $220. $250 for fungal growth enhancing mycelium, and possible $200 delivery fee for everything. So they don't seem to be adding any kind of a markup to the plants the way landscapers usually do. I mean, they seem to just be really super committed to their work. So anyway, so since we have money in the budget, David said that it would be fine to just go ahead and move forward with that, since it was, I mean, for us, relatively small amount.
What's the total?
Oh, the total is 3,670, and that could vary ever so slightly. He was ballparking delivery.
And this is a fall planting, you say?
Yes, it's a fall planting, and the reason we had, or a large reason why we had the call meeting was we need to get on their schedule so that they can order the plants from their providers, and we can get on their schedule. And what that does is a number of things. It increases competition for the bad stuff coming back. It provides I can provide a list of all the trees and plants that they are going to install. But they did a nice job with variety and things that were enhancing to wildlife and things like that. So it was really super.
This is likely an unanswered question, an unnecessary question, since it's you with Cheryl. They're all natives, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. They are zealots in the best possible way at Reforest Atlanta. So I've really enjoyed working with them and talking to them about it.
Well, that was just to get that on the record.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I guess the only thing and that's something for Jody, they just would like a pile of mulch, clean mulch, which, we can usually get from the waterworks, water reclaim folks.
Okay.
We
We
don't,
can make that work.
we don't use the mulch we can get from,
We do in some of the flower beds and things, our street mulch, but then that down there doesn't have, what is it, Ms. Laura? Pecan?
Black walnut and
Black
pecan
walnut.
both have something called jugalon in it, which is it's a chemical the tree produces to diminish competition in its root footprint. And when you grind it up, that stays active for like 3 to 5 years. So there's no telling whether we've got that in our mulch, and if we're spending money to plant these guys, we want them to have the best kickoff. And that clean pine mulch is just beautiful stuff, and it's free.
And the land that gives it to us,
Yeah,
just at home.
and I'll let you know when, Jody. That's not for
Okay.
a while.
Anybody else have a question? On the trees? Bill, is the planning commission going to step forward with anything soon?
They've been working quite a bit on some changes to the code they wanted to recommend to the council, but they're still kind of putting those together in a format that y'all can review. So we'll be having those come to the next work session. That's been the main driver that they've been working on. And of course, we have Dave Huber sitting as a new member. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. He's been
Anybody else have a question? You're looking at me, you have a question? Okay.
I'm just watching you carefully.
Okay, you do that. I don't want to step out of line. Might be my first and last. Okay. Downtown Development Authority. I don't want to sound like I'm skipping over the rocks trying to do a dance, because that's not the intent, but it looks like that. But with historical concepts, we're trying to work out a time that they can come to the council and show who they are at this point in our work. So we were trying to do it this month, but as you can tell, that wouldn't work, so we're trying for September. Any other questions on that? I can see you putting down a basin.
I'm looking at you, what can I do?
Okay. You have anything else to say, Bill?
Yeah, just that we are going to host the Georgia Pollinator Census, the Great Georgia Pollinator Census which is organized by UGA, at the Wesley Street right-of-way meadow. And Sustainable Newton will be supplying all the materials that we'll need to hand out to people, clipboards, survey sheets, writing implements, things like that. And then she'll tabulate those and produce it. So it's nice to be part of that.
Date.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. That will be August 19th from 4:30 to 6 at the meadow right across from Old Church. And everybody should come and do that. It's easy and it's fun. And we are also, there's one, but I think it's just for college students that Daniel's hosting down at the farm on the 20th. But I guess they probably wouldn't turn you away if you showed up down there too, if you can't make the Friday evening one.
Okay. Any other comments?
Laura, I had put the 20th on Facebook.
Oh, I'm so sorry, it is the 19th. Ours is.
Y'all okay with that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is, but I will double check that too.
Okay. So, Jody, you're on. About the moving of the stones and everything.
I was asked to get some prices to move the monument at the cemetery, and also the big monument on Watco Street. So I reached out and got some bids for it from two. I had a time finding two contractors would bid on moving those monuments, but I did get two different contractors to bid on them. Mr. Bell has that information. Yeah, it should be. Should be.
Jody, have you done anything with American Field and maintenance before?
No, sir, but Mansfield has, Porterdale has, and Covington has. They're a reputable company, and they're covered in both companies.
them.
Okay.
So, I mean, I did check them, and they do good work according to every other city
The
of Tyson.
pricing is so much different than HCS.
Yes, sir. They're a big company too. They're also a big company, pretty big company. So I don't see anything wrong with them. Like I say, I reached out to other cities, and they all do good work for them.
I don't know American Field, man.
Yes, sir. American Filmmakers.
They're good to
A guy named Rod Richardson. That's who I deal with.
Yeah, I mean, they looked
Rod.
like
Carl D. Richardson.
If you listen,
Never asked him, just, you know, he might
You listen to it.
Okay, you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I just was gonna ask if they were apples and apples, you know, if they were both reputable firms, and I'm sure they are, since
They were.
Jody got bids from
Yes,
them.
ma'am.
You know, and, so the American Field Maintenance looked good to me.
You're 20% lower too.
So the large Waco sign and the memorial stone, right now the plan is to store it somewhere, I guess, over
At the shop.
At the shop, right, and, of course, with the other smaller signs to be removed and stored there also. Some months ago, the mayor had reached out to, I think his name is Professor Ellison. He is the co-chair of Twin Cities Memorial Project, or Twin Campus, whatever it's called, the Twin Memorial Project, I guess, with Emory in Atlanta and Emory here. And he had not responded. He actually owns a firm, runs a firm that kind of does mediation and things with racial issues particularly. And so we were hoping he might be able to either run a program for us here to kind of have a committee and looking at these issues and see how we can best move forward. But he never responded to the mayor, so I called their office and left a voicemail with, well, actually, I left a note with one of the staff, and never got back to me. David asked me to send another email, so I sent an email directly to Dr. Ellison. He didn't respond. I talked to Laura Gaffney. She's going to reach out and see if he can respond through her. But we just really haven't been able to find anyone to really lead a committee at this point, you know, to see what the next step would be in terms of retelling our story here in Oxford. So that's kind of where we're at more globally. But Laura did say she would reach out, and Laura Gaffney did, and she's also going to, I can't remember her name, so she's a professor who's married to Daniel.
Molly McGee.
Yeah, Molly
Yes,
McGee.
that's right.
She's very involved in looking at sort of the history of monuments and public spaces and all this kind of thing too. So she might know of someone that could also assist with us in this effort. So we're working hard to find someone to kind of help put this together and lead us, but haven't had any luck yet.
Okay.
That's unfortunate.
Anybody else have a question, concern?
One thing I think we may have mentioned before, just to wrap this up, I guess, is the Waco sign is actually state property. So there's a long convoluted history to all that, but there was an actual state commission that originally oversaw the production of all these roadside signs that you see. And in fact, that's what the Waco sign is. It's just probably the largest in the state of Georgia, they said. That commission was, I guess, decommissioned back, I think, around 1976 in the Carter administration or so. And it's now run through the Georgia Historical Society, I think it is, down in Savannah. And they actually have a staff that works on creating new signs, roadside signs, and also caretaking the state's old property. So they had actually recommended that the Waco sign be destroyed since it was being removed from its spot, but we're declining to do that at this point because we just don't know if we're going to be perhaps putting it back with other signage to enhance it or clarify it or what we'll be doing. But so right now we're just going to be storing it and then going from there.
Mr. Mayor?
Marcia, do you want to change our credit card?
Oh, we have a question.
I'm sorry.
No problem. In the storage of the monuments and in the contract where they're decommissioned and brought into the shop, do we have some guarantees or some insurance that if there's some sort of accident that physically wrecks the things, we can, the town can have the repair paid for in anticipation of the day when, as you say, Bill, we get to the next step, and instead of just taking stuff out, we're saying this is the way it was, and this is now the way it is. And something like that could call for those monuments to be reinstalled. And if they've been busted up and broken, it's going to be a lot more expensive to do that than if they had been properly curated and cared for at the front end. And even if that means delaying the installation until we figure out what the next step is really gonna be, that shouldn't be taken off the table either, I don't think.
I think the only one in my mind with any fragility would be Watco Street. The one in the cemetery,
I'm not familiar with the one in the cemetery, but I think in the notes it,
that's
Marcia,
about
didn't you-
twice as big as you and I put together.
what about the one behind Old Church?
That is a similar size too. It's a
Well,
big-
that stone won't be moved,
Not that one,
Okay,
just the
With the,
plaque.
we're gonna require them to provide $1 million liability, certificate of insurance. Wouldn't that,
And the contractors have $1 million liability coverage. Moves.
but will we be able to get enough of that to take care of any, you know, damage or destruction of the signs?
Well, any contractor that does work for the city has to have that $1 million liability. And, so that's SOP. And otherwise, there's been a lot of dispute about the one in the cemetery anyway, particularly the one in the cemetery. And I would not anticipate it going back intact, but it may. I'm just saying it, in my mind, it's not as likely. There's been a good bit of controversy about that already, over the years, in the past, 10 years?
Yes.
Yeah. The Watco Street one, it's a little more fragile and probably needs to have a little more care taken with it. But that's all we can do, is all we can do. I don't think anybody was going to be kind of deliberate. It would have to be total accident. I would think.
But I think he's thinking also of the storage. Is there any guarantee that the storage would protect the
Well, the one in the cemetery, that's out anyway.
And that is too. I mean, they're all outside.
They're all outside, yeah.
And Watco is protected by being straight up and down, I mean, vertical.
where
It
is
is,
it?
it's grass or something along those lines. I just can't see it deteriorating except by getting it broken. Would you, Joe?
No, sir. I intend to store them in the shop yard up there behind the transformers where there's not a lot of traffic or stuff moving around.
I mean, could we put the Watco Street upstairs, your
Oh,
office or
no,
something?
that thing's huge. You get upstairs, it's huge.
We
Yeah,
got a
it's
big door, so that's the forklift.
just a regular door though, apparently.
They're not taking down the brick, are they? They're just taking down
No,
the
that,
plaque.
that
itself.
plaque is big as those bricks.
Yeah.
You know, it's 3 panels in one. It's all made together. I thought it was 3 different
Oh,
panels.
I thought it was three.
No, sir, it's
panels.
one panel, that whole thing.
Go for it, Joe.
It's gonna be a challenge to get it down.
It is.
It is.
Because
Because it's so big. Man, Mr. Bill looked at it. It's not 3 like I had thought right by.
Well, that's what I thought.
No, sir, it's
Sorry.
one giant piece of cast iron. That's what it is.
Art, does that help with your thoughts?
It does. I think there's still some holes. I mean, everybody that does work right here's got $1 million liability. It's in the T's and C's of the contract that binds some of that money to any loss of the city's property.
Well, the sign isn't the city's property at Waco, it's the state's, I'm not sure.
Well, that's a good question. Can we even move it?
We can take it from, we can take it from the site because we own the property, but the state in effect still owns the sign. So they had said that once it was removed from the site, they would prefer it to be destroyed. I think their concern is it gets used out of context. The context of the sign is meant to be at the site, and they don't feel the sign should be disassociated with its original presentation site.
Okay. This looks like a swamp.
This looks like a big river hole here.
Yeah.
I think it's, in terms of the state, I mean, if it's broken, that's what they asked for. It's their property, they asked for it to be destroyed, so if it does break, I mean, that's what they wanted to begin with. But, you know, I mean, this is what they told me, I talked to the
Was it
director.
$4,000 to bust it up?
To break it.
Yeah.
We hope, I mean, we'll do everything we can.
All right.
Thank you, Mike.
Let's move on.
Thank you.
All right, now, Marcia, you would like to make some changes to the credit card system.
well, credit card providers for in-person services listed first. And I think that's the way I gave it to Bill, but, this all started because I started investigating how to accept credit card payments and possibly phone payments for citations. That's all it started out as. The company that I've been talking to, which is Government Window, they integrate with our courtware software, so there's a lot of benefits to using their services for citations. People who have gotten citations and are paying them online or on the phone, that they would be able to look at their online account and see whether they need to appear for court and things like that. And they charge 6% if it's online or on the phone, and the reason that is so high is because there's an increased risk of chargebacks from these types of payments if the person is not coming in person.
Change the screen, please.
Sorry. What do y'all want me to show?
What you talking about?
Okay. The features of this agreement with Government Window, they pay the entire cost. There's no cost to the city of Oxford. They don't pay the cost. The person paying the citation pays the cost. How we got to talking about in-person payments is they could provide card readers and in-person services for citations, and a natural outflow of that is to possibly use them for other in-person payments. They would provide card readers at no charge to us. They would allow us to accept Visa. We don't have a very large customer base right now for acceptance of payments in-house, since we don't accept Visa right now. So the best they can give us right now would be 4%, again, that would be paid in full by the customer. If we went on that and they saw that our volume was increasing, we might bring it down to something in the future. So, but these are really two different things, and I would ask that they be considered separately. Either one of these would help us in our office. So that's really, I pretty much covered everything in my memo. I'll just stop and see if anybody has questions or concerns.
I wanted to express my appreciation for the really thorough job you always do when you're presenting something like this. So I'm super. I don't have any questions.
In reading, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
in reading this, I got the impression that you do not know at this point whether it will integrate with the new software.
That's correct. And I think I mentioned that because they don't bind us to like an annual contract or anything. I tried to make this point that it would be easy to move off of them without, having to pay any penalties or anything for early cancellation if they're not able to integrate it.
Actually, sorry, the only thing that I did have a question about was the very last thing that you showed was the attachment of the Covington page.
Okay.
And I would, if they do this for us, if we go with them, I'd like to see the percent. It just says a percentage service charge will be charged.
Okay.
I'd love to see the actual
Sure.
percentage on there, because if the 6% is kind of hefty, and you might have some folks going, oh, heck with that, I'm going in to pay it. So,
Particularly since everybody else charges 3.5, I think.
yeah. So to me, I would, if I were in that position, I would be shocked if the paid page came up and, I didn't know it was going to be 6%. So that was the only thing I had.
Okay. They customize the web page for each city or whoever they work with. So I was just showing this as an example.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. No, this would cover, well, that's why it's two different pieces. The add online and IVR phone payments for citations is just for court, but I would also like for it to be considered that we use the same application for our other in-house payments, to go ahead and use it and switch over to the SNA if we have to, when the time comes.
So, your motion on in September will be for both of these sections, and move forward that way.
Yeah, but I would like to do them as two different ones.
So it will show up as two different units on our agenda.
And so, Bill, is that correct?
Yes.
Because, I mean, I don't want, there's a chance for some of it to be approved. I don't want both of them to be not approved because there's concerns about one part.
Okay. I think we understand that part. Yes, Jim?
And they're gonna provide all the point of sale equipment.
Yes, sir.
And I guess our internet is strong enough to take some more bandwidth.
I increased our bandwidth up to 200 gigabytes last year, and I could probably call again and get more for a lower price if I needed to. But
As you keep adding all this electronic stuff, and it starts to grow.
sure. But I bumped it up to twice what it was and got us a lower price actually, and I could probably do that again if I needed to.
So we're just want to look to see how much all this is going to take away from you. You don't need to slow the process down with the molasses.
Right. Oh, I agree. Yes.
All right, sounds good. Anybody else have a question? Comment? Okay. You must do a fantastic job. Doing the job. All right, we're going to consider a request by Malden and Jenkins to increase our audit cost by 7%. For a little bit more depth on that, I'm going to ask Bill to fill in.
Well, we looked to see if there was an actual contract that we could kind of consider for this issue, and I guess the engagement letter in effect is the contract that they send out each year, and so, we went back and looked at the pricing that we considered some time ago, and even with a 7% increase, they're still considerably below, the other bids. And it looks as though, based on what we got information and email from Malden and Jenkins, last year they actually lost money in effect on the work, and this year with increased costs with gas and everything else, they're just asking for this to basically cover their costs. So, as Mr. Reddy and I were talking over the phone about this, you don't really want to make your auditor, bound into a contract where they're losing money every year for a 5-year relationship. They might not. They might find a way to take that out on you with your audit or something. So it seems like a reasonable number to me, but obviously we don't have to do the increase. They made the decision to bid at this price, but it's like a small amount of money.
On the other hand, it bothers me that accounting firms losing money. That makes me nervous.
Well, I think this
Labor costs, that's the part.
how much time is being spent here, because it's a time-based situation.
Typically, as y'all, I'm sure you know, the audits with a new firm take longer the first year, a little bit less time the second year, and then the third, fourth, fifth, they kind of start to cruise after they kind of get the system down and understand what all the books look like. So, I wouldn't feel too bad for them. But,
And all you guys that know how to do math, it's only $1,400.
We say that a lot.
Yes. It's something I think we need to consider in a positive manner.
But can you call on Jody again? I like that deer in the headlights with a kid.
You all know I'm not a good spokesman.
I think you're a good one.
If you're going to do all the mechanical work in the background, you're the one that needs to explain it.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess I'll go back to Bill about some of the changes that are updating on the Dryden Degree project.
yeah, okay. So we've got a PowerPoint that I put together really today, based on some notes I got over the weekend from Atkins Engineering. So the mayor had kind of asked me to do this because this project's become quite complicated due to the three funding sources that we're kind of juggling here. Hopefully I have one if you want. And I'd be glad to create a PDF for this and send it out later if you'd like. But this is really just a draft funding plan, so I'll just stress that right now this is the way we understand things as best as we can. You know, not completely knowing what some of the costs will be. So if you go to the next slide, I guess. The thing that I guess might shock you initially is just that we're looking at a project now that's, you know, going to be north of $5 million. And when the mayor and I first heard these figures, frankly, we were, you know, quite shocked. But then when we understood the cost associated with complying with federal engineering requirements, it all began to make sense. And Atkins Engineering basically walked me through several different projects they had done recently of a similar nature, or maybe even of a nature that weren't even this complicated, using federal funds, and they talked about how the different pricing works out due to that. So they feel that this is just a number that we could certainly use as an estimate at this point, but as you can see, this is only looking at the stream restoration and then the trail for about a mile going from East Sewell Street down to I-20. And I've got a map at the end that I'll kind of show you, how that might work out. But right now they're looking at preliminary engineering. This is something I actually learned in this process. I've used the term preliminary engineering, or PE, for years, and I always thought it was literally preliminary engineering, that there was also later final engineering. But that's not actually what it means, because I kept asking Atkins Engineering, why is the preliminary work so expensive? And they're like, well, no, it is the engineering. So what they mean by preliminary is it's all the engineering and design work that it starts before the actual construction. So it's all the engineering leading up to construction. So it's the final design product, basically, until when you start construction. So the term preliminary always meant to me like if there's an initial engineering and then there's a later engineering phase, but there's not. Preliminary engineering is what is preliminary, or as I wrote there, preparatory to the advancement of the project to actual construction. So, so the PE in this case, they're estimating it to be about $1.25 million. And if there is, other right of way to get, they're looking at maybe $200,000 for that, and then the construction is the $4 million there. So if we can go to the next slide, I can kind of break down, we'll get into what some of the different money is and all that. So the congressional earmark is this week actually being put into the what's called the Transportation Improvement Plan with Atlanta. So Atlanta, is who kind of controls the MPO in this area. That's the MPO that we're in, and they're going to be folding this project into their TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan. And with that being done, GDOT can start getting us the paperwork and everything to advertise the project and all that. So as you can see, with this acceptance of federal funds, there's going to be all kinds of different state procurement that we have to follow, federal procurement engineering processes that are different than if we were just funding it locally. And we have determined that the engineer themselves, like who's basically acting as Atkins right now, is going to have to be procured through what they call a PDP process. I'll go a little bit here in a minute, but it has to be basically procured through this federal process, and then the city will actually act as the administrator for the project, the LAP certified agency. So I finished all the classwork for that, and we've got an application that we're working on right now with the state. We're trying to see if Jody might be able to act as the secondary backup LAP, or if they could just allow me to act solely as the local administrative project director, because we have such a small staff. But they have waived that in some cases, so we're kind of seeing if they'll waive it for us. But right now, I've taken all the classes, and we just have to adopt the federal procurement standards, and then we have to fill out an application to be approved by GDOT. So we're working through all that right now. So the $900,000, we did not know, at least until a couple of weeks ago, so that it requires a 20% match. And the way the federal government works out their match is you take the $900,000 has to be 80% of the entire project. So the way you do that math is you take $900,000 and divided by 80%, we get the 1.125 million. So our local match is 225,000. So that's the total project cost or budget for the congressional earmark of 900,000. It becomes 1,125,000. So the plan development process, though, the PDP, causes you to have to go into a lot of work with the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA. You may have heard that phrase before. And a lot of what the NEPA is, we don't really feel there'll be a lot of requirements in the end that NEPA puts on the project. But what Atkins is telling us is you have to basically go through the entire process to then present to the state that there isn't a real impact. But you have to get to that point by going through all the different steps, otherwise they won't allow you to move forward. So you'll still have to go through a lot of the NEPA requirements, or at least to show how you're satisfied them or not having to worry about them because the project doesn't impact the environment negatively. But there'll be a lot of effort spent just to get to that point to show that NEPA either is or is not involved in the project. But there is a lot of, like it says here, coordination with other agencies to get all this done, and so there'll be a lot of time added to this process. And as you can see, that they typically take 2 to 3 years to design a project through this process. So we'll have to start all over again with like a public, I was telling Mr. Wyndham, we'll have to have a new public input process for the use of these funds. So I think that'll be good. I mean, it'll be explaining to the public what we're looking to do and all that. It'll be a very, open and regimented, very detailed, information-rich process that's required by the federal government when you use these dollars. So I think that'll help get the community really kind of see the importance of this project going forward. So GDOT has told us very emphatically that we have to have the money obligated by June 2025, which seems like it's a long way away, but when you look at design taking 2 to 3 years, it's not a long way away. But what they mean by obligated is that we would have to have basically the project bid out by that date. So the absolute deadline is September 2025 to have it obligated. So it doesn't have to all be spent, it just has to be obligated to a contractor or a construction firm by that point. They would prefer we have it obligated by June 2025 based on their calendar and how they work with the feds. But so those are kind of the deadlines we're working with right now. And what that'll mean is that based on whether or not we get these other funds, we can kind of right now have some flexibility as to we move the $1,125,000. Is it going to preliminary engineering? Is it going to right of way, or is it going to construction? So as we hopefully get these other funds, we can kind of move around these particular dollars, because these are very flexible dollars. You'll see here in a moment. It has been determined that the congressional earmark can be used for matching the GOSP. So that's really good news, because that's a $3 million grant. We won't have to really use very much local money to do that. You'll see that here in a minute. So that's really great that these funds are going to be able to hopefully make a real impact with the GOSP funding. So if you go to the next slide. The other grant, this is really important for this evening. So the Transportation Alternative Program basically did not have enough applicants for the state to process. I believe the state had $17 million, I think it was, to federal dollars that they wanted to go through, and they didn't get really any applicants. So they basically reached out almost individually to cities and said, please turn in an application. So they've actually already gone through the first phase application. I guess they didn't have almost any applicants. So the second phase closes this Friday. So what we're asking this evening, I've talked to the mayor about this over email over the weekend, is if we wanted to take some of the money we've already committed to this project, I think it was that $500,000, and just carve it out as saying it's $250,000 of funding locally that we're going to match to the TAP program, the TAP program. And he was fine with that. I mean, what I had said to the mayor and what I said to the Atkins folks and all that is that, if we end up not wanting to go through the project, we just withdraw the application. So we were going to have Mr. Reddy sign for the city to basically just make a statement to the grant that we are going to obligate $250,000 as the match for the $1 million with the TA, the Transportation Alternatives Program funding. So we want to do that this evening. So if you have any questions about that before I go forward. I got the letter up there with Mr. Ray, and I can pass it out. It's basically when I said it, when it's just stating that we would match the $1 million. And you got a copy there, I guess, for the signature. So we had not realized, basically, it was last week we began really putting together the TAP application, and that's when we all realized that it's all due this coming Friday. And these are, again, federal funds also. They have to still follow that plan development process, but it'll be good because we're already in that process with the congressional earmark. So that means that it won't really cost us that much money to use these funds because we're already going to be doing that with the earmark. So that's actually really good that we're, you know, just kind of already locked into that way of spending the funds and doing that process. So,
just a pause.
sure.
Does anybody on the council have a problem with us moving forward with that?
I do.
Yeah, and none of what we're talking about tonight is going to be costing us any more money than we've already talked about or what's in the budget. So it's just that we're going to basically delineate $250,000 of what we've already got into the budget for this project to specifically match the Transportation Alternatives Program.
I'm sorry, my chuckle is something that occurred to me. I'll tell you later, it's not for me.
Okay. Well, and this here is just basically kind of the overall kind of layout of how all the different funds work. And I guess to me, the go-home message for this little chart up here is that the $3 million that, you know, has that 25% match, but then of that, 74% of it, or $740,000, is going to be coming out of the earmark, and then we'll be using our local match to the earmark of $185,000 as part of the match for GOSP. And so, in other words, to get the $3 million, all we've got to do is come up with another $75,000 that you see there in that column where it says local other. So we're actually taking $75,000 and then turning it into $3 million, with the grant. So I think that's a really a good story to tell that we're leveraging that kind of local money to get that done and all that. So I thought that was great that we could use the earmark and then these local dollars to make that happen. Yes, sir.
I hope this is an appropriate place to ask this question, but we've talked several times about the 5 acres and the DDA returning that to the city and it being a part of this package. Am I understanding that correctly? That this could be part of that $75,000 or?
I don't know whether it can be part of the $75,000, but it can certainly be a nice big happy check mark on the GOSP grant, because everything like that we can show, like local partnerships, which includes with our DDA, would be points.
Yeah, none of the funding we've spent on land can be counted towards this grant because it was all done outside of the federal process. So I sent an email actually to the mayor a few weeks ago and told him not to have any more conversations with property owners because now that we're going to be using these funds or we're locked into this program of using these funds, even if we weren't spending federal money, because on the actual land, we are going to be spending federal money on the construction. So that means that any negotiations going forward on property or right-of-ways or easements will have to be done through a federal process. So the land itself would count as just being connectivity, but it wouldn't count towards a match in terms of dollar figures.
But we're just in the beginning of that process that you're talking about, right?
The GOSP, yeah, we're having a meeting Wednesday at 10 with the people from Northeast Georgia Regional Commission to start sort of, I guess, targeting the GOSP grant.
So Northeast Georgia Regional Commission is sort of taking the lead on the GOSP. They're being supported by Athens, and then Athens itself is doing the Transportation Alternatives Program grant on their own. And then they've been also helping with the stuff that we need for the earmark.
Is this an open meeting?
I mean, it's a phone call, or a video call, I guess.
I have a question. How feasible, or are we relatively sure that this is a feasible plan that could be carried out? In other words, with all the problems you have with regards to the environmental and stuff, things like that, especially along the creek, is this more or less assurable that we could possibly make this thing happen? Am I making myself?
I mean, everyone looking at it feels that it all matches the requirements of the grants, and that any of these grant funders would consider this something that they would want, you know, it satisfies the requirements of the grants on paper, and it's nothing unusual in terms of, like you're saying, like hitting a roadblock and saying, well, we can't build this here because of this or that. I mean, we don't,
That's what I'm getting.
yeah, we don't see that as, nobody sees that as a
They
problem.
don't foresee it, or you haven't foreseen anything that they have told you at all that could be a stumbling block?
Jeff, additionally, remember John Calabria out of UGA did a big study which included good trail paths down the creek, and he saw no red flags at all. And you know, this is up his alley. This is his thing. So as far as our pre-study of the area that was done by UGA, I mean, there were no hiccups with that at all. No red flags at all. So.
You know, the only thing I've heard recently mentioned was, and I don't know, I think the mayor had talked about crossing the creek maybe one more time than Atkins felt would be necessary. In other words, every crossing costs exponentially more than staying on one
And you create
side.
a problem as
So-
far as drainage or anything else is concerned, river flow.
Right, so Atkins is saying it may be better to try to purchase more right-of-way on one side of the creek. It would be cheaper to spend the money on getting more property rather than crossing because of the cost of doing that. So that's the only thing I've really seen. But that's not necessarily a problem, it's just another strategy.
Yeah, to the additional cost of what we're talking about right here.
That's one reason we put the 200,000 for land acquisition, is
Okay.
that that would still be cheaper than a crossing.
All right, that's what that was for. Okay. Okay.
So again, this, you know, this slide just kind of breaks that down, and then this just kind of goes back to the point that these are some of the rules that we have to comply with. So the Davis-Bacon Act, for instance, you probably have heard of that. This means that you have to pay local prevailing wages, and there has to be someone, basically me, your LAP person has to go out, or have someone go out under your authority and keep track of the payment of all the different workers on the site. They have to all follow the EEO reporting, and there'll be higher levels of testing, so the concrete or any other materials that are used have to be tested more thoroughly than they were if they were just being funded by local money. So that costs a little bit more time and money to do the testing requirements. So this is just kind of showing the area that we're talking about. So this image is taken from an old presentation the mayor put together some time ago, and I've kind of just added a couple of points to it. So understand that we're still talking about the idea of, you know, going from 20 all the way up to eventually the YMCA facility at Sunny Road. But there is one thing that we, I think, have talked about a little bit, is that what's called the cattle crossing, typically under 20, probably won't be able to be used going forward. I don't know if y'all heard about that, or we discussed that. Yeah, it's just the fact that because it has a live creek in it, you probably would not be able to use that as a way for the trail to follow. So what we're talking about right now is the idea of perhaps taking the path up on L Street towards 81 and towards the sidewalks that we have, just as a temporary kind of, they call it logical termini. So the grants all require that you have, you know, the path just can't end somewhere in the woods. It has to match with, you know, other facilities, or have a parking facility or park or something associated with it. So we're thinking of bringing it up, probably Bonnell, could be Wade, I don't know, but somewhere it's going to have to kind of come up towards 81 to connect into the sidewalk that we have. And that'll just be a temporary type, but obviously it'll be useful later on. And then the other logical termini would probably be over at the school at Maine State Academy. So that's what we're kind of thinking at this point. Project Jane, we just got an email from the DEA or Industrial Development Authority, IDA today, and that project is still not dead. It's not, charging out of the gate yet, but the company is still in conversations with the state and in conversations with how they're going to build a building, maybe getting a new contractor or whatever. So that project is not gone quiet yet. So if Project Jane does go into this area, that would be a real, I think, boost, just having people wanting to use it and them cooperating with us on their side and moving it further, so that'll be really important. This would be part of the whole county's Yellow River Trail, so the hope that the engineers and people kind of working on this have been saying that's a really big focus, is if we can show how this is basically getting the, quote, Yellow River Trail established on the north side of 20, that would be a real big boost, give you a lot of points for the grant application, and maybe give the county, some thoughts of hey, we've actually got this thing, it's a beachhead established, we got to start moving on this and all that. So, and frankly, our conversations in the past with Covington about working together on the crossing or getting somehow connected to their path has been positive. So everyone seems real, enthusiastic about seeing this move forward. So, but the $3 million is going to be really important to GUSP. Is really going to have to happen. But even if it doesn't happen, we'll still have the federal funding and hopefully the transportation alternatives funding to get all the engineering done, the right of way all sewed up, and maybe in some of the work to some degree or another. So, but that's kind of how we have everything sort of lined up at this point. And like I said, I just want to make sure that y'all understood we would be turning in that one application this Friday. But of course, if you didn't want to turn that in, if you come back later and decide it wasn't a good idea, we can always withdraw it or whatever. You don't have to accept the funding when you get it too. So when I worked in Hall County years ago, we would sometimes apply for a grant and get the chairman to sign it later because we thought, well, if the chairman decided they didn't want to do it, we'll just refuse the money, so it's not no harm or foul kind of thing, I guess.
So Bill, on this particular presentation, is there anything that needs to be moved forward with on our September meeting? Or is this just an education?
This is really just kind of informational. Mainly, if y'all wanted to ratify the signature, for this match, you could, I guess, but I don't know if it's necessary. That's kind of the all.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. So under other business, as we know, September the 5th used to be a holiday for the majority of the working world. And so we have conflict, and we'd like your permission to move that meeting into the Tuesday, the 6th.
I got no problem with it.
That's okay.
Yes, it is, but it does have to be discussed, not just. Okay. All right. So we had some good discussion tonight, and we're going to have to hear more about the movement of the monuments.
What about item 3?
Did I miss one?
No,
No.
that was,
Oh, the concrete repair. We didn't talk about the concrete repair.
That was part of it that was bid in American Field Maintenance and HCS Services.
They're separate
Separate
actual bids, but they were
contracts.
in the
Yeah.
same
Same.
part
Yeah, I
of
saw
the.
that, I just,
It's the section of concrete behind the old church where the trees raised up about 6 inches higher.
Yeah, and again, American Field Maintenance was much lower.
That's why I said the three of them together are 20% lower than the other
Yeah.
two.
I'm sorry, just that clear, Jim.
no problem.
Okay. And Marcia's going to move along with